I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Gold hitting new highs in euros and British pounds, US dollars, all across the world. People want gold and out of the fiat currency matrix. Stacey Herbert, tell me more.
Well, Max, the entire world's financial system is once again crumbling. And part of the reason, of course, is the oligarchies that rule our world and have not faced justice for that because they are part of the oligarchy. There's no differentiation between the heads of these banks and the heads of the government. But also importantly, the other important ingredient is propaganda and how propaganda confuses the populations in the West. Half of U.S. social program recipients believe they have not used a government social program. So this is from the United States, and if you look at this chart, of the top 4 demonstrating the most ignorance of being recipients of government welfare, 3 out of 4 of them are referring to higher education. That is the 529 or Coverdell, which 64.3% of people who receive this government funding don't even know they're receiving taxpayer-financed help. Home mortgage interest deduction, HOPE or lifetime learning tax credit, and student loans are also people who receive this government assistance are completely ignorant of receiving government help.
And you're tying this in with propaganda. So in other words, all day long in all the major media in the United States, you hear this: we don't want socialism, we are pure capitalism. But in reality, every single one of those frickin' losers is on some government-sponsored social program to one extent or the other. But because of propaganda, they don't even know they're on a social welfare propaganda. Tell us more of the details.
Well, Max, this is from Boing Boing, and with the way Cory Doctorow explains it, he says, keep your government hands off my Medicare phenomena writ large, a society of people who subsist on mutual aid and redistributive policies who have been conned and conned themselves into thinking that they are rugged individualists and that everyone else is a parasite. So where do they get that misnotion? Of course, it's from the likes of Fox News, where you hear over and over and over again, the welfare people are those black people who live in public housing, and you see those people way down at the bottom of the list. 25% of food stamp recipients don't realize they're receiving government aid, i.e. 75% know it. Yeah. Which is pretty shocking, actually, that 25% don't know where they get it from.
Yeah, well, the ones that they do know the deal that they're getting by the man, and the people on the top don't know that actually they're also getting by the man.
Yeah, so the bottom is told constantly by the media, and the media distracts the upper middle class and the middle class people from the fact how much of the redistributive policies benefit them. They don't know they're receiving these benefits, so that's why they're out there, shouting to the politicians to get rid of those welfare bums when they themselves are the welfare bums. And I bet you anything that if they questioned bankers, because I don't see them represented on this, but I bet you 100% of bankers, like Lloyd Blankfein, who said they don't need any help from Goldman Sachs. We don't use any help from the government. But we know for a fact they've received trillions in help.
Oh, absolutely. 100% of their entire existence is due to the largesse, the government assistance, the redistribution of wealth vis-a-vis the government to these schmatas on Wall Street who are adding nothing to society. They are the parasites. They are the leeches.
Well, on a number of regards, because first of all, while some of them will recognize that TARP was there, they know that's a government program, but it's the taxpayer and their AAA rated debt that backs these banks, that gives these banks 0% money to speculate around the world and to destroy other economies.
Right, they have unlimited capital available to them at 0% interest rate to speculate with, and if they make a bad bet, they get bailed out. So it's actually, let me explain something here. See, there's a betting strategy involved. It's called the martingale betting strategy. If you go to the roulette wheel and you put your money on red, if you lose, you just double your bet. And you keep placing that money on red until eventually you win. And this is called the martingale betting system. And The problem of using it in a country like America, when you have banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan using the martingale betting system, using derivatives and unlimited borrowing of cash, is that it destroys the currency. So what Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are saying is like, we're just going to keep placing our bets on the same red on the roulette wheel of global derivatives markets, and we don't care if it means the total destruction of America, the global financial system, and the US dollar. To me, that is the equivalency of any brazen act by any extremist wielding any type of weapon anywhere. And yet nobody is stepping in and cutting these people off from their unlimited free credit and their bogus attempt to win by rigging these markets.
Well, we talk about this propaganda and how it changes the outcome of our economies and our political systems. So Eric Cantor hit by Democrats for potentially profiting from U.S. default. House Democrats are circulating a resolution accusing House Majority Leader Eric Cantor of having a conflict of interest in the debt ceiling debate, a move that could provide an awkward C-SPAN moment for one of the lead Republicans in the budget negotiations. Well, okay, so Eric Cantor is not just making a little bet. It's not like, okay, he bought gold or silver and he's going to profit if the U.S. collapses. No, he's taken an active bet. He owns ProShares Trust Ultra Short 20-year Treasury ETF.
That's right.
Ultra short.
Ultra short, double down, betting that the American bond market will collapse because they don't hit the debt ceiling resolution in any reasonable period of time. Thus, he cashes in on the ensuing chaos. Now, this is jihadi bankers and brokers who are willing to blow themselves up to make a quick buck. So flashing back to 9/11, Eric Cantor would be one of those guys who bought airline puts on the airlines right before they crashed into the towers, profiting from the deaths on 9/11. That's the kind of financial terrorist Eric Cantor is. Proven by him buying double down short government bond ETF and then making sure that that debt ceiling becomes a chaotic situation. That's financial terrorism. That's treason.
You mentioned the martingale technique, and this is, are our politicians in the United States striving to destroy the economy? I mean, is this them doubling down over and over? He's doubled down on this bet? Like, how long has he been, is he making up for losses? Like, has he been trying to make it default and it hasn't yet succeeded and they haven't yet been downgraded and they haven't yet triggered a credit event?
Well, meanwhile, they're destroying Greece, as we know, through their acolyte in the region, the IMF. They're destroying now, looking at Italy, Spain, they destroyed Ireland. And of course, guys like Eric Cantor make millions of dollars by destroying these countries on making these bets. And insider trading is legal in Washington. The shadow banking system is 14 trillion, large. So a lot of this stuff is off the books, unregulated, unseen. And they're just laughing at the American people. Eric Cantor is laughing at the American people. So I don't know why I can't laugh at the American people. If one of their own senators laughs at the American people.
You mentioned Greece in particular, and Greece went down that slippery slope of oblivion because Papandreou and the likes of their oligarchs who own all the country started making bets against their country. So once they had that incentive, once they owned the insurance products that only go up in value, that are worth nothing if the economy doesn't collapse. If the same with this product that Eric Cantor owns, it's worth zero if the economy does not collapse.
Right. You can't make the argument that it's somehow germane to a well-managed, well-balanced portfolio.
Yes.
This is the equivalent of improvised exploding devices killing Marines in Iraq from the terrorists. Eric Cantor is the same thing. He's a terrorist trying to kill people in America using improvised exploding financial devices.
Let's move on to another place where, is being attacked financially, collapsing anyway, is Italy. Italy orders short sellers to disclose positions. Now, this is interesting because Italy's financial market regulator moved to curb short selling after the country's benchmark stock index fell the most in almost 5 months and bonds tumbled on investor concern Italy would be the next victim of the region's debt crisis. So the regulator is forcing short sellers to reveal their positions when they reach 0.2% or more of the company's capital. But the original headline of this article, which I failed to capture, was that they were going to ban naked short selling. But that changed. They haven't banned that.
Well, they often confuse the two. Short selling per se is a perfectly acceptable strategy in the market. It offsets buying stocks using borrowed money or margin. Selling short would be the equivalent of the sell side because you're doing that also in a margin account. So these two balance each other out and create a fair price discovery. That's fine. But naked short selling is counterfeiting. This is when you sell stock or security, in this case, that doesn't exist. You're simply selling something that doesn't exist in the hopes of fooling the price discovery mechanism, the specialist, into falsely creating a negative downward pressure on prices using counterfeiting. And to get more technical about it, the way it's counterfeit is that the obligation to deliver the short sale within the 3-day period is ignored, and the regulatory agency that's set up to count that stuff doesn't exist anymore. So this is clearly a case of outright fraud.
Well, Greece, in the case when their country is being attacked by naked short selling, Papandreou came out and he said, I'm going to ban naked short selling. What he did, in fact, was widen the window for which people could short it to 5 to 10 days. So, in fact, he was doing the exact opposite. So you could probably look for Berlusconi to be doing the same.
Right, exactly. The 3-day period or 5-day period of the trades settle, when they reconcile all the buys and sells, he expanded it to 10 days, which is the exact opposite of trying to diminish the naked short selling. It's by increasing, it's throwing gasoline onto the naked short selling. So Papandreou is either A, incredibly stupid, B, incredibly corrupt, or C, all of the above.
Well, let's stick back here with Italy, because Greece, Ireland, and Portugal are goners, but those countries are less than $400 billion economies. Now we're seeing Spain and Italy attack. Italy is a $2 trillion economy with 2,000 tons of gold.
2,400 tons of gold, Italy. It's the second biggest position in the Eurozone. And that's the mother lode. I think that's been the target all along. The Greece, the Ireland, Portugal, those are sideshows. They're little microcap countries, not much of a deal there. But Italy's got actual gold that the IMF and the people who support the IMF, the terrorists, as I mentioned, like Eric Cantor, they're helping to facilitate the thieving of that 2,400 tons of gold, because that is meaningful.
Yeah, of course, because they need that gold, because, of course, is the IMF going to get the airport landing fees from Naples or Sicily?
No.
But Italy is an important country to look at. I mean, it's kind of, Berlusconi is a media tycoon. He owns 90% of the media there.
He's the Murdoch of Italy, exactly.
Yeah, even more than that. But this is why, this ugly old buffoon who runs a country into the ground, and the population seems happy with it because he has lots of breasts on his television shows and in all his media, and porn stars that he nominates to run the economy, and they seem all perfectly happy with that. But when the IMF comes and takes their gold, I think somebody else is going to have the last laugh. They might have had real fun with this buffoon, but...
Look, Stacy, I think this is incredibly important. Can you stay? Can I hold you over past the break? Is that okay? Can you stay?
I think I could stay.
All right, don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. With Stacy Herbert, we were talking about that fraudulent nincompoop Berlusconi, who The Economist magazine on a cover story just recently called the biggest jerk in Europe, I believe was the headline. But continue, please.
Well, we're on the topic of media tycoons who have destroyed democracy, certainly in Italy, and now it turns out destroyed the economy. But I want to turn to Murdoch. Everybody's covering this story, of course. But he's a media tycoon who has destroyed democracies and economies based on his propaganda. And I want to show how this is systemic and systematic, the way he is treated by politicians and by justice around the world, and why we continue to find ourselves in economic collapse all these years later. And it's part of the political collapse. First, take a look at this picture. This is Rupert Murdoch. Last weekend, arrives in London and meets with Rebecca Brooks, who was the editor of the News of the World until 2003. And when asked what his top priority was, according to the Daily Mail, the 80-year-old media mogul gestured to Mrs. Brooks. She is, he replied. Not the victims, not the shareholders. B Sky B shares plunge as News Corp bid mired in uncertainty. First of all, it's mired in uncertainty. The guy should be in handcuffs. The whole entire team should be in jail right now. But here's how the Guardian reports. Bloomberg, they say, reported that as many B-Sky-B shares changed hands in the first 10 minutes of trading than as in a normal day. But there were also signs that some institutional investors were buying up B-Sky-B shares, often from hedge funds who were bailing out of the company. What does that tell you, Max?
Well, it tells me that he's got a great relationship with banks. The same banks that the government bailed out are now buying shares of B-Sky-B on the behest of Murdoch in a collusion that is, again, completely anathema to the sense of fair play and democracy in the marketplace. Again, it's a fraud. It's perpetuating a fraud. And let me just make a little aside here. Who's the biggest shareholder to come to Murdoch's defense on day one? But Saudi Prince Aliwad, who's a big shareholder. And of course, Saudi Arabia is a perfect example. There's a country that's completely in the throes of a dictatorship, a pernicious dictatorship, where the wealth and income gap is probably one of the highest in the world. That's what the Murdochs aspire to. They aspire to lords and serfs. They aspire to the divine right of schlepped, schnupped, dictators.
Well, going back to the story about hedge funds ditching the shares and selling them to institutional investors. Institutional investors are also, of course, the passive funds of the pension funds. So these, once again, all of the risk, all of the toxic waste, all of the fraud, all of the bad stuff gets dumped onto passive investors, us chumps, whether we're taxpayers or peasants in this oligarchic system. We get dumped with the risk. Whatever you want, it doesn't matter. It's what happens.
Then we saw the same thing with British Petroleum. One of the reasons why they weren't fully prosecuted for their ecological holocaust is because they said, oh, well, everyone owns BP in their pension account. You don't want that to go down, do you? So they've made everyone a complicit in the crime. And you see this now all over the place. This is one of the problems in this shareholder-owning society, is that the oligarchs can come back and say, well, you own a little bit of a share here and you're implicated. If you prosecute me, then you're guilty. And of course, that is a fallacious argument that's tied to a sense of entitlement that a guy like Murdoch has, that it goes against any notion of a democratic society bordering on treason. And again, 1690, John Locke making his statement, when the social contract is broken, a revolution is required.
Basically, Rupert Murdoch has delivered to us a democracy, and this is how this continues. We no longer have the rule of law. We have only democracy, and you can bet your bottom dollar he always sticks with one party. In the U.S., it's Republican. In the U.K., it's basically conservative, even if it's under the guise of New Labour, like Tony Blair.
Blair's a conservative, let's be honest.
Okay, so he establishes a hyper-partisan democracy where half the population will not ever see that he is doing any wrong. Or the audience of Fox News, will they be shocked that he tapped the phones of 9/11 victims? No, he won't, will he?
No. And of course, their defense, they say something about free speech. This is the fact that they're unregulated protects free speech. They broke the law, and they're justifying their getting at the so-called truth justifies their breaking the law.
So let's see if the Department of Justice will get involved, because News Corp is a U.S. listed company. Rupert Murdoch's News Corp could face $100 million bill for U.S. investigation into police payments. Dr. Evil here, right? $100 million fine they're facing for a $44 billion company.
Let's be clear about this. All it means is that they call up Goldman or Morgan and they borrow $100 million, which then Morgan will put onto the taxpayer tab as part of the overall bailout.
So this potential $100 million would only happen if the U.S. Department of Justice decides to investigate based on America's Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So basically, American listed companies aren't allowed to bribe foreign officials or like police or royal protection officers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the U.S. justice system is got some cards to play, and I mean, clearly, unless you want to just say that 9/11 was a joke and a bunch of financial mercenaries died on that day and we shouldn't give a flying hoot about it, but unless you feel my way, then you should prosecute Rupert Murdoch. If not, then stop complaining, you whining babies.
But First, the U.S. Department of Justice has to investigate Dick Cheney, which they haven't done that yet for his being the chief executive during the time that KBR was bribing Nigerian officials. I remember it turns out that they just paid the Nigerian officials $250 million, something crazy, to make sure there was no investigation there.
Right. Hence, they're seeking to raise the debt ceiling because they got all these hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bribes that constantly are adding up. They got another $2 trillion of bribes.
So let's look how other people inside Britain are treated by U.S. justice and the British justice system for similar crimes to what Rupert Murdoch and Rebecca Wade/Brooks are being accused of. U.S. anti-piracy body targets foreign website owners for extradition. British website owners could face extradition to the U.S. on piracy charges even if their operation has no connection to America and does something which is most probably legal in the UK. This, according to the US's Immigration and Customs Enforcement official Eric Barnett. He says that as long as a website's address ends in .com or .net, it is implicated in the spread of pirated US-made films, TV, or other media. It is a legitimate target to face extradition to the US. And his quote defending this decision is this, Max. I'll give you an analogy. A lot of drug dealing is done by proxy. You rarely give the money to the same person that you get the dope from. I think the question is, are any of these people less culpable?
Well, first of all, copyright has a clause called fair use, which 90% of the time the people that they're going after are simply using their constitutional fair use rights. So they're the ones that are breaking the law, number one. Second of all, let's talk about this copyright thing for a second. The people that Murdoch hacked into, the 7/7 bus bombing victims, the soldiers that got killed in foreign wars, they have their stories. It's their stories. They own their stories.
And their story has a monetary value.
Obviously, because it moved millions of units of papers. Okay? So that's a copyright violation right there, because copyright law, under you Digital Millennium Copyright Act freaks, you have the ownership of your own story still to this day. You haven't figured out how to genetically remove people's personality from their skeletons yet. So the fact that Murdoch uses their stories to sell papers is a direct violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. He has broken copyright law thousands, tens of thousands of times.
George Michael,
yes,
who would be covered by the RIAA, a mega-selling musician, he's now very involved in this as well because his phones were tapped and he says his computers were hacked. So he definitely has RIAA covered material that they would have hacked, they would have listened to, which is an act of copyright infringement.
That's right. So they're eating their own tail here. They've passed a law that makes no sense, and now they're being tripped up by it.
Well, with this copyright story, the U.S. is seeking the extradition of a 23-year-old from Britain to America because he linked to something that was copyrighted. Now let's look at this. Hacker Ryan Cleary could be extradited to U.S. to face court over CIA computer attacks. Again, this is the duplicity that is treated. Here's I guess he's a teenager, autistic teenager. They're seeking his extradition because he hacked into a computer. He faces 10 years in prison in the United States. Where's Rupert Murdoch for hacking George Michael's computer?
Right, so Murdoch is engaged in industrial strength hacking across hundreds of thousands of accounts probably, because they already know of thousands. That probably represents the tip of the iceberg. Meanwhile, one or two garden variety teenagers who happen to run afoul of this ridiculous law are being treated like ranked terrorists and subjected to the harshest penalties of the law.
Okay, Max, let's end where we started, and that was where we said that the propaganda from Fox News in America leads many people to not realize that they themselves are the welfare queens they so despise. Visa Europe blocks WikiLeaks donations through payment site. So here's Rupert Murdoch's press in the UK, in the US, who hammers on and exposes the luxury lifestyles of people living in prison or on food stamps. Then there's Julian Assange, who exposes the genuine extravagance of the Mubaraks and Ben Alis of the world, who have stolen hundreds of billions from their populations with the help of the big banks on Wall Street, I might add. And it's Julian Assange who is marginalized and attacked financially by the likes of Visa and MasterCard. While David Cameron pleads with Rupert Murdoch, please reconsider your bid for B-Sky B. Don't do it, please.
Well, what you're describing here is the wealth disconnect between rich and poor, which has been growing for a couple of decades, is spilling over into almost every single aspect of the law. There's two sets of laws for copyright, there's two sets of laws in banking, there's two sets of laws almost on every piece of the jurisprudence spectrum that you could imagine. And that is clearly a breakdown in the social contract. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a complete separation from the kleptocrats that are running away with the wealth versus everyone else that's stuck there eating dirt, like in Haiti. We're all becoming like Haiti. All right, Stacey Herbert, well, that's all the time for we have. Thanks so much for staying over and going through some of this stuff for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.